I'd like to talk a little bit about Balinese trance. And this is then also true for all other forms of trance that we might see around Indonesia, and not only necessarily Indonesia. And the reason why I want to do that, to talk about this subject specifically, is because I'm today in this very special location, this very special place called Taman Bebek, located in the Sayan area in Ubud, here in Bali. And this place is special because it originally belonged to a legend, to a great legend among the expats, the first and oldest expats of Bali, a man from Australia who later became more known with his Balinese name, Madewijaya. And it's now not my purpose to talk about him and what he did in this video, but Madewijaya, he first of all spoke perfect Balinese, which is very rare for an expat. And he was literally a living encyclopedia of all things Balinese, and not only Balinese. And so he built several places, beautiful places around the island. This was one of them, Taman Bebek in Sayan, in Ubud. Wonderful place. Many interesting, curious people throughout the decades came by here, some less known, some more known, just to name a few people like David Bowie and Mick Jagger and Yoko Ono and so many others came by this place. And very often by this very specific house I'm at. This was one of the original houses. Madewijaya's original house where he lived was, I hope you can see, on the other side of the fence. Madewijaya then passed away quite a few years ago, and he left a great legacy behind. And it's a shame. It's very sad when, unfortunately, great pieces of this legacy, like Taman Bebek, are bound to disappear, like what is happening with it now. Already the Madewijaya's original house has been taken down, and it's just very sad because, in my opinion, in my view, those are some of the things that make Bali really special with Balinese culture, because these things are intertwined and they made Bali what it is today. So it's a little bit sad, but okay, it is what it is. People try to preserve Madewijaya's legacy, but okay. And what is interesting about this Taman Bebek and where Madewijaya built it, and slowly now I'm connecting to why I want to talk about Balinese trance, is because he built it on a beautiful, beautiful spot where in the 1930s another foreigner lived, a foreigner from Canada called Colin McPhee. Colin McPhee, who was a musicologist, and he was very interested in the traditional Balinese music, and he wanted to come here. He did in the end come here to research and study Balinese music and Balinese traditional instruments. What is interesting is that Taman Bebek is located almost next to Four Seasons Hotel nowadays, and sometimes once or twice a week you can hear from here, from the valley, through the valley, right, traditional Balinese music coming from the Four Seasons Hotel that is played on the traditional Balinese musical instruments that are the original legacy, part of the legacy of Colin McPhee when he lived here in the 1930s. the 1930s were a very, very, very interesting decade in Bali, because it was the first decade of great tourism in Bali, and so many interesting people used to come here. Just to name somebody famous like Charlie Chaplin, or so many others. So among the people who came here in the 1930s, Colin McPhee, this musicologist, was one of them, and he was, probably fair to say, the very first foreigner to live in Siam, in this exact spot where then Madhawijaya built his Tamandabek. And another interesting person who came here in that decade was Margaret Mead, sort of known as the mother of anthropology. So she then moved and lived for quite a long time in a village located now about 20 minutes, about 10 kilometers south of Ubud, called Batuan, a village that is very important for culture and some cultural aspects of Bali, from painting to other sorts of kind of performances and so on and so forth. On the other hand, on this side of town, so here where Colin McPhee lived, Colin McPhee had a wife, Jane Bellow, and she was also, like Margaret Mead, an anthropologist. Among the subjects that they were researching and studying in Bali, one of them was trance. And the way they researched trance, the trance states and so on, was very different, because Margaret Mead, she was doing a very scholarly academical research as an outsider. She would look at it from the outside, and that's how she did her research. On the other hand, Jane Bellow, she was more of an insider, so she was going with the people, looking at it from the inside, asking for the opinions of people, what they see, what they experience, and so on and so forth. You get my point. So it is very clear that the conclusions, the results that they got to in their research are very different. One as an outsider, one as an insider. So Margaret Mead's idea, you see, was the fact that I'm not going to explain about the results of the research, because it would be very inappropriate, and it is very complicated, and it's a very long subject, right? So it's very actually easy to even Google it and find it online or get books. I think Jane Bellow, she wrote a book called Balinese Trance, or Trance in Bali, something like that. And there, like, if you're interested in the subject specifically, you can, of course, now dive more in depth. But the reason I want to talk about it, and now I will slowly close the circle, is Margaret Mead. Her idea was that because Bali is a patriarchy, a patriarchal society, which of course back then in the 1930s was much more perceived than it is today. The way especially girls, women, are brought up and taught is to not really to speak out loud their ideas, their opinions, more to suppress their emotions. And so during a trance, that is a moment when they can open up and have all these suppressed feelings come to the surface and release them through all those typical things that we might see in a trance, from screaming to fainting to crying. So for her, it was a very much psychological phenomena and not so much spiritual, which on the other hand was more of a Jane Bellows take of it, because she did her research, as I just mentioned before, as an insider. So by talking to people, understanding their ideas, their views of it. For her, that was really a spiritual manifestation, a spiritual phenomena where people could really connect to something else, right? The reason why I wanted to talk about it, and again, as I said, now if you're specifically interested in their research, in their conclusions, it's much, much better to go through their material, right, in the books and so on. But the reason I want to talk about it is because you see, sometimes, if you've ever seen a trance here in Bali or in other parts of Indonesia, sometimes some very, very strange things happen. You know, people, just to name a few, I don't know, they start cutting themselves with super sharp blades and knives. They start stabbing themselves, or they could break stuff on themselves, like bottles, glass bottles, or then chew on the broken glass and walk on the broken glass, and being thrown on a broken glass, and walking on fire and chewing on coals, all sorts of things that from a certain perspective might look supernatural. And if you take these two views, let's say from Margaret Mead and from Jane Bellow, right, only one of them, in a way, would potentially explain the manifesting of certain phenomena, of certain, let's say, supernatural phenomena, right? Which is the fact that trance is an actual thing, is real, is a spiritual experience that the person is living, and therefore, sometimes, not always, can manifest these strange things. But then you see, trance is also something that, especially during specific ceremonies, is something that is expected to be there, something that must be there in order for a ceremony for a ritual to really be fully accomplished, let's say. And so, and everything that comes with the trance, so all these crazy things that might happen. But what was then the correct version? Margaret Mead's or Jane Bellows? Well, this is a real mystery, right? I mean, if you ask me, I would say that both of the things are true. Sometimes one more than the other. So you see, sometimes when certain manifestations of trance and everything that comes with it is expected to be there, and there is no natural, spontaneous manifestation of these kind of things, well, then somebody must fake it. And with it, must fake everything that comes with it. So all these crazy things, you know, from cutting yourself to stabbing yourself and, you know, walking on glass, whatever. I'm not saying that it's not real, right? When it's manifesting through a real, spontaneous spiritual experience. But on the other hand, when it's done on purpose, just to accomplish the duty of literally a performance, well, in that case, some other mechanics and dynamics are take place. And I think it's very important to be aware of this fact. And here I'm closing now the circle of why I want to talk about. I wanted to talk about this, connecting to all my other videos, right? Always talking about this subject of spirituality, of self-development, of superpowers, and so on and so forth. We always have to be aware of this fact. So is it real or is it not real? It's both things. It's both things. It can be both things. And both things might look from the outside exactly the same. So everything that comes with it, again, we really have to be aware of it. And so I hope this information, this little story that I shared, is maybe helpful for somebody to understand some of the aspects of these arts and some of the manifestations that we see during some of the performances. So that's it. That's what I wanted to say. And yeah, well, thank you for listening. I hope it was somehow useful. And well,